So here we are, it's January 2021, and once again, the RPG YouTube galaxy is somehow all aflutter with talk about Pathfinder 2 again. I know this because I'm getting a new wave of contrarian comments from Pathfinder 2 fanboys on some of my older videos.
No, that's wrong!
After all, I was someone who perhaps saw through some of the glamour a little bit early when it came to this system, and I put my stake in the ground as far as how I felt a little bit alienated by some of the design choices that the system made. I felt that it was very oriented around tactical gameplay, that the emphasis was more than ever on a balanced experience of tactical combat, to the expense of immersion in world building, and in particular when it came to customizing NPCs and letting NPCs live and breathe as entities on their own. I felt as a game master that monsters were now definitely going to get used up and die. And as a player, I looked at the spell casting options, especially utility spells, and I saw how restricted those spells were, and how all the creativity and really fun gameplay that comes from people finding new uses for non-combat spells, all the interesting risks taken by adventuring parties to try and circumvent encounters, to try and get past monsters without fighting them, often by using a combination of skills and magical prowess, was something that I didn't feel would easily become a part of Pathfinder 2 play. In fact, in some cases, if you're familiar with that meme, what I thought I was playing, what I actually played, this might even be the fake Chinese 2 terabyte flash drive edition. Whoa, isn't that a little bit harsh on Pathfinder 2? It might be, but it's true in the sense that it's still a game that labels itself as if it's another Dungeons & Dragons-like game. They're saying that you get to play a wizard who can cast invisibility, sleep, and charm person, but none of these spells work the way that they did before. None of them are even remotely capable of preventing a combat encounter or bypassing one. And in some cases, you have to stick your neck out so far even to try and see what they can do while paying the opportunity cost of limited spell slots, same limit as they have always been. It's a joke. Before I lose you entirely thinking that this is just YouTuber on YouTuber drama or another dunk session on Pathfinder 2, I am going to get into how specific mechanics can enable creative play or disable creative play. Anyway, some options are good, some options are less than good.
For me, it can all be summed up with 3 words: illusion of choice.
Cody speaks to how he feels that the game is pressuring players towards a certain optimal sequence of actions. The game is providing really negative feedback when players do basically anything else, and the monotony is in some respects browbeating his group over the head.
Forcing yourself to make worse choices makes it feel like you're losing at an RPG, because there's this stigma at so many tables that you need to be doing the maximum efficiency amount of damage at all times or you're bad at the game.
Wait a minute. Maximum DPS and optimal actions and shaming people for not being as effective as they could on their turn is definitely not the place that I'm coming from here. So maybe I don't agree with Cody Lewis after all. When I hear that's the kind of attitude at a particular table that I'm thinking about joining, I think that it's probably not a place for me, because I'm the sort of person who is often interested in avoiding combat or having combat be cathartic. The players have made a plan and they're executing it, rather than just being challenged. A quota of 4 challenges per day. No. I think I might be in a different place than Cody Lewis. I enjoy high fantasy worlds where wizards that can cast these spells exist, and where the worlds are different because of it. And I think that maybe the worlds of Pathfinder are a little bit of a different genre, a different kind of high fantasy. So for the rest of this video, we're going to look at individual Pathfinder 2 spells. What has come off the table because the spells have changed in a fundamental way. Sometimes the answer might be not much. And in other cases, it might reflect an entirely different world that the game is taking place in. And that's what I want to get at, is that I just want there to be a little bit of honesty and truthfulness to how Pathfinder 2 is taking place in a slightly different world and a slightly different genre than the games that came before it. As for what kind of genre that is, well, that's a question that I'd like you to try and answer in the comments below, but I will offer my own guess at the end. And it is something which is worthwhile and might appeal to some folks. It's just not for me right now. To start things off, let's begin with the unassuming spell, Invisibility. Still level 2 in Pathfinder 2, as it has been in other editions, and it has a decent duration of 10 minutes. It's actually an improvement on Pathfinder 1. I will say that if you look back through the additions to the beginning of Invisibility, there was a lot more flexibility. You could use it on objects. You could even try it out on someone as sort of a curse to make them invisible to their community for the day. You can imagine them getting pretty frustrated with that. I'm even going to go one further and say, since concentration is required of the 5e version of Invisibility, there might be an edge. So that's to show you that I'm being fair. Now let's move on to a versatile treasure of spellcasting, or at least in other D&D games it has been. That's Web. But in Pathfinder 2, it's been laid low by a casting time of 3 actions. That's your entire turn. It has the same area of effect, but it has a pitiable duration, and what it actually does to creatures that fail their save or otherwise become ensnared is considerably reduced in scope. Web in other editions is the sort of thing that you can use as you pass by a T intersection or a doorway to plug a hole so that you don't have to worry about being outflanked. Web in other editions is the sort of thing that you can use to cover your escape from archers, or just keep them from shooting at you because they can't reach their quiver. It's the sort of thing that you can use to tie up and make the spellcasting of enemy spellcasters more difficult. In other words, it's a jack-of-all-trades spell, but it doesn't finish many combats. And there's even some interesting applications where you might be able to use it to do some Tarzan Spider-Man swings across caverns. But with a 1-minute duration, all of this is severely curtailed. And just read it closely how this works. Their speed gets reduced. That's it. They don't even get any condition applied to them, and they can continue to shoot at you, sling spells at you, and so on. It's only after many failed saves that they can even become immobilized. In other words, Web has been laid low by Pathfinder 2.
Hey, it's Antoine, the person talking to you in this video. I thought we'd take a moment to get to know each other a little bit better. And I want to tell you about a spell called Ray of Enfeeblement. A little bit off the beaten path. You may not have used it before. I'm going to show you a version that's a little bit older that has interesting non-combat applications. Someone could fall out of the saddle. Someone could have to take off from their job. Someone might not be able to carry their armor or swing their sword any longer. In addition to the combat effects. Now, if you look at Pathfinder 2's version, not only do you have to roll to hit, and then they get a saving throw, but all of those other possibilities are scratched out. It simply applies one condition that gives them a simple penalty. And yet, it costs one of your daily spell slots, a scarce resource. Takes your turn in combat, another scarce resource.
If you're looking for a more familiar example of a spell whose scope of possibility is really circumscribed, look no further than Sleep. Bizarre version in Pathfinder 2 has the targets falling asleep for only a single minute, and really they're not asleep at all. They just stand there transfixed. They don't even drop their stuff or fall down, which is sort of interesting as a spell, but all of those possibilities for putting people to sleep in order to haul them off for human trafficking purposes, putting people to sleep to take their uniforms and sneak into the base as stormtroopers, putting people to sleep for medicinal purposes, just out of the kindness of your heart for the insomniacs. What happened to all those possibilities? They're gone. Now, I will be the first person to admit that sleep had an outsized power level in every edition and every game that I've seen it played in, but it was always held in check by the fact that it didn't ever work on elves nor undead, and so these characters that relied upon sleep also had to rely upon their companions. Now, based upon the ground that we've already covered, you might think that it's just low-level combat spells with a strong debuff ability that might have painted some broad strokes over them to bring them down a notch. Or you might be thinking that it's just low-level spells in general. But Knock, a standby spell that almost nobody used, which opened doors, is now not even 100% effective. It just gives a bonus to bashing things open. For that matter, every mobility spell from gaseous form to levitate to flying, these have all either gone up an entire spell level from where they were before, or they've had their durations severely curtailed.
But why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
Well, one reason might be to open up design space for things like flying mounts or allies and companions, except that those aren't really mechanics in the Pathfinder 2 core book any longer. It might be for emphasizing the use of ephemeral magic items like dust of flying or flue powder. That could be interesting, but I haven't seen much of that, so we have to believe it's for another reason entirely. And I gotta give credit to a commenter who made the point that Pathfinder 2 is all about teamwork and synergy and holding up your companions. Okay, if that's what Pathfinder 2 wants to double down on, that could be interesting. It's not the sort of thing that I see much from its promotional material, and I definitely don't see any kind of real change to the branding or the world building to talk about how it's less magical. How wizards can do less with the same investment in time and spell slots as they used to. I'm not 100% opposed to the idea Vancian spellcasting just doesn't get as much done as it did in other D&Ds. But I do think that we need to imagine how this changes the genre of the game. It says to me that Pathfinder 2 is perhaps something more like wuxia, fighting heroes. If you're familiar with the sort of anime like Bleach or JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, where the battling can go on for multiple episodes at a time, maybe Pathfinder 2's magic is more about the struggle and about its component in teamwork and in clashes, and less about the MacGuffins and the heists and that sort of thing. In other words, Pathfinder 2 prompts a different genre of play. Now, it's possible that all of this circumscribing of the magic of spellcasting, the mischief of special uses for spells, is an unintentional side effect of pulling spells down a notch in order to up the teamwork level of Pathfinder 2. If this is the case, then I'm given to contemplate how spells could be designed in a different way that allowed more open-ended uses. An example of this might be how web in Pathfinder 2 has this very specific application. It just reduces speeds rather than a description of how it wraps around people's arms and legs. And that would allow some more narration. It might even allow web to be shot to pull items off of a wall or to create a net for falling teammates. So my constructive thought, my where do we go from here, is to think about how a complex mechanic in any way, is the sort of thing that can be specific in terms of what it does in the fiction, and that can enable creativity. And if the design of the costs and the nuances, how far it can shoot, how many actions on your turn you need to expend to use it, and how many fewer spell slots you're going to have for the rest of the day if you use this thing. If all of those things are held in the mind and imagined, as in, how could someone use this? How would someone use this? If these things are played with as kind of an interesting possibility toy, then we can use that feedback to compound and to create something which is interesting beyond the combat grid and beyond the 3 actions a turn. I don't really object to Fly being higher level, nor do I find it all that hurtful that Knock doesn't actually open doors any longer. What I do think is that I want to get up to some mischief when I choose to play a wizard. And we have now 40 plus years in the role-playing hobby designing D&D type games. So let's take the lessons learned from this go-round and move forward. Let's look at Pathfinder 2 as its own game and think hard about what sort of genre it is and how it might be different. And happy 2021, everybody. I hope you're making a good one out of this.